The sun peeked through designer curtains worth more than most people's monthly rent, landing on Ashley Bennett's sleeping face. The 18-year-old influencer groaned and pulled her silk eye mask off, reaching blindly for her phone. Her perfectly manicured fingers, fresh from yesterday's spa trip, scrolled through hundreds of notifications. "Another boring day in paradise," she muttered, rolling her eyes at her own Instagram caption from last night's party. The photo showed her lounging by their infinity pool, her fourth outfit change of the evening, while staff scurried around in the background preparing for her impromptu midnight snack request. The massive Beverly Hills mansion echoed with emptiness as Ashley made her way downstairs, her designer slippers clicking against the marble floors. Her mother was probably at another charity lunch, the kind where more gossip than charity happened. And her father, well, he was wherever CEOs went when they were too busy for family dinners. "Good morning, Miss Bennett," their housekeeper called out cheerfully. Ashley barely nodded in response, too busy typing out a mean comment about someone else's outfit choice at last night's party. The fresh smoothie waiting for her on the kitchen counter went untouched as she grabbed her car keys instead. Her life played out in perfectly filtered snapshots. Shopping sprees where she'd buy entire collections just because she could, brunches where she'd order everything on the menu only to take 2 bites, and parties where everyone laughed at her jokes because her father owned half the city's prime real estate. At school, teachers turned a blind eye when she showed up late or didn't turn in assignments. The last teacher who tried to give her detention quickly found themselves dealing with her father's army of lawyers. Ashley had smirked through that whole incident, filing her nails while the principal apologized profusely to her father over the phone. Money fixed everything in Ashley's world. When she crashed her first car, a brand new one appeared in the driveway the next day. When she got caught cheating on tests, her father's donations to the school made the problem disappear. Every mistake, every bad decision, every cruel word was swept away with the wave of a platinum credit card. Her social media followers ate up every moment of it. They watched as she carelessly tossed $1,000 dresses into her donation pile after wearing them once, as she canceled plans with friends because better offers came along, as she bragged about getting service workers fired for the smallest mistakes. That afternoon, while lounging by her private pool, Ashley scrolled through comments praising her amazing life. She smiled, completely oblivious to the emptiness that lurked beneath her perfectly curated existence. Her phone buzzed with messages from so-called friends, all wanting to be part of her next expensive adventure. "Daddy," she called, pressing her phone to her ear, "I need the black card." "No, the one with the higher limit. There's this new car I want." "Yes, I know you just got me one last month, but this one's better." The sun set over Beverly Hills as Ashley planned her next party, completely unaware that her carefully constructed world of privilege was about to come crashing down. In just 24 hours, one reckless decision would set in motion events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about life, worth, and real happiness. Little did she know, the universe had different plans for her. Plans that no amount of money could control. And it all started with a garden, a judge, and a lesson that would change her life forever. The music pulsed through Ashley's new Mercedes as she sped down the quiet streets of downtown, fresh from another endless party. Her designer purse lay open on the passenger seat, spilling out receipts from her latest shopping spree. The clock on her dashboard blinked 2:30 a.m., but time meant nothing when you've never had to punch a clock. Can you believe what she was wearing? Ashley spoke into her phone, recording yet another story for her followers. The steering wheel drifted under her manicured hands as she focused more on her phone screen than the road. Like, hello. That bag is so last season. The screeching of tires cut through the night. Ashley's world spun in a blur of headlights and panic. Her Mercedes swerved, jumping the curb and crashing through a chain-link fence. The impact sent her phone flying as the car finally came to rest in what looked like a garden. For a moment, everything was silent. Then Ashley started laughing. "Oh my God, this is literally so funny," she giggled, already reaching for her phone to record the aftermath. Her airbag hadn't deployed, and besides a small cut on her hand, she was fine. Through her camera lens, she surveyed the damage, narrating for her followers. "Look what I just did," she sang, panning across the destruction. Her car had plowed straight through what appeared to be some kind of community garden. Crushed vegetables and broken garden beds littered the ground. A small greenhouse lay shattered, its plastic panels scattered across the dirt. A light flicked on in a nearby building, and an older woman rushed out, phone in hand. "Oh my goodness. Are you all right?" she called out, hurrying toward the wreckage. But Ashley was too busy with her own phone, trying to find the perfect filter for her video. "This is so random." Ashley continued recording, completely ignoring the woman's concern. "Daddy will totally handle this. I mean, who even puts a garden in the middle of the city anyway?" The woman's face fell as she realized Ashley's attitude. "This is the River Heights Community Garden," she explained, her voice tight with emotion. "We feed over 50 families from this garden. The children's education program uses it to teach." "Whatever," Ashley cut her off, still filming. "Just send the bill to my father's office. Though honestly, you should thank me. This place could use a complete redesign anyway." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Ashley rolled her eyes and started typing out a text to her father's lawyer. This wouldn't be the first time she'd needed legal help, and she wasn't worried. Money fixed everything, right? But as she looked up from her phone, she caught sight of something that gave her pause. Through the broken fence, a small group of people had gathered, residents who'd heard the crash. Among them was a little boy, maybe 7 or 8, tears streaming down his face as he stared at the destroyed garden beds. "That was my tomato plant," he whispered to his mother. "The one I grew from seeds." For just a split second, something flickered across Ashley's face, perhaps the first hint of doubt she'd ever shown. But she quickly pushed it away, replacing it with her practiced smirk as the police cars pulled up. "This is going to get so many views," she muttered, hitting post on her video. The blue and red lights painted her face as she stood there, completely unaware that this moment, this one reckless act, would set in motion events that would shatter her perfectly curated world. The next morning, her video would indeed go viral, but not for the reasons she expected. And as she'd soon learn, some things in life couldn't be fixed with Daddy's credit card or a team of expensive lawyers. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way, and Ashley Bennett was about to get the wake-up call of a lifetime. The courthouse stood tall and imposing against the morning sky, but Ashley Bennett strolled in like she was entering a coffee shop. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor as she typed away on her phone, barely glancing up as her father's expensive lawyer guided her through security. "This is such a waste of time," she muttered, adjusting her Gucci blazer. Her father had assured her this was just a formality, a quick appearance before some local judge, then back to her regular life. She'd even scheduled a spa appointment for the afternoon. The courtroom was already packed when they entered. Ashley's viral video had drawn attention, but not the kind she was used to. She caught whispers and disapproving glances from the crowd, but chose to interpret them as jealousy. What did these people know about her life anyway? "All rise," the bailiff called out. Ashley stayed seated, continuing to scroll through her phone until her lawyer nudged her sharply. Rolling her eyes, she stood, then immediately went back to her screen. "Miss Bennett," a deep, authoritative voice rang out. "In my courtroom, phones are not allowed." Ashley looked up, meeting the stern gaze of Judge Robert Washington. Her expression shifted from annoyance to something uglier as she took in the distinguished black man in his robes. She'd expected, well, someone more like her father's golf buddies. "Whatever," she said, dropping her phone into her designer bag with excessive force. "Let's just get this over with. I have plans later." The judge's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held a wisdom gained from years of seeing through facades. "Miss Bennett, you're here facing charges of reckless driving, destruction of community property, and creating a public hazard. How do you plead? Ashley's lawyer started to speak, but she cut him off. Look, I'll just pay for whatever I broke. That's how this works, right? Daddy already wrote a check to cover the damages. A murmur ran through the courtroom. In the gallery, she spotted the woman from the garden, sitting with several community members. That crying kid was there too, though he wasn't crying anymore, just staring at her with disappointed eyes that made her more uncomfortable than she'd like to admit. Miss Bennett. Judge Washington leaned forward slightly. Money may cover the physical damages, but it doesn't address the harm done to the community. Are you aware that Garden provides fresh food for families who can't afford grocery store prices? That children learn about nutrition and science there. That senior citizens find purpose tending those plots. Ashley shifted in her seat, that flicker of doubt returning. But her ingrained responses took over. Well, maybe they should work harder and buy their own food, she said with a dismissive wave. Not my fault they can't afford. Your Honor, her lawyer interrupted, perhaps we could take a brief recess. No. Judge Washington's voice was firm but calm. I think it's important that Miss Bennett continue. Please, tell us more about your views on hard work and responsibility. Something in his tone made Ashley pause. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. Not as a wealthy man's daughter, not as an influencer with millions of followers, but as someone whose actions had real consequences. But old habits died hard. She tossed her hair back, mustering her usual attitude. I don't have to explain myself to you. Do you even know who my father is? The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees. Judge Washington sat silently for a moment, studying her with eyes that had seen generations of troubled youth pass through his courtroom. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of years of experience and compassion. Miss Bennett, I know exactly who your father is. The question is, do you know who you are? Because right now, I'm looking at a young woman who has everything except the one thing she needs most. Ashley's carefully constructed mask cracked slightly. And what's that? She asked, trying to sound sarcastic, but instead sounding almost afraid of the answer. The judge's response would change her life forever. But first, he had to make her understand that this time, money wouldn't make her problems disappear. This time, she would have to face real consequences. Consequences that might just save her from herself. A heavy silence filled the courtroom as Judge Washington leaned forward, his fingers forming a thoughtful pyramid. Ashley shifted uncomfortably in her chair, unused to being the focus of anything but admiration or envy. The judge's next words would shatter her world of privilege forever. Miss Bennett, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed room. I've reviewed your driving record, your social media posts about the incident, and your behavior in my courtroom today. I've also read letters from the community members affected by your actions. Ashley's lawyer started to stand, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. The maximum penalty for your offenses could include jail time and substantial fines. However, I don't believe either would achieve what's needed here. For the first time that day, Ashley felt a flutter of real fear in her stomach. No jail time. What else could he possibly do to her? Instead, Judge Washington continued, I'm sentencing you to 1,000 hours of community service. Ashley let out a sharp laugh of relief. That's it. Daddy's assistant can handle that. There are plenty of charity galas. At the River Heights Community Garden, the judge finished, his voice cutting through her words like a knife through butter. The very one you destroyed. The color drained from Ashley's face. What? No. No way. I don't do manual labor. She spat the last words like they were poison. You'll report there every day, Monday through Saturday, from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. You'll work under the supervision of Mrs. Chen, the garden's director. And Miss Bennett? The judge's eyes locked onto hers. You'll do the work yourself. No sending replacements, no buying your way out. If you miss a single day without medical documentation, you'll serve the remainder of your sentence in county jail. Ashley's lawyer jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is unprecedented. Miss Bennett has social obligations, commitments. She has one commitment now, the judge interrupted. To understand the value of what she destroyed. To learn what real work means. To see firsthand how the other half of our city lives. In the gallery, Mrs. Chen stood up. She was a small woman with weathered hands and eyes that had seen both hardship and hope. Your Honor, we'll make sure Miss Bennett learns everything she needs to know about tending the garden and serving the community. Ashley slumped in her chair, her mind spinning. Manual labor? In the dirt? With poor people? This had to be a nightmare. But my social media followers, my brand deals. We'll have to wait, Judge Washington said firmly. Starting tomorrow morning, Miss Bennett, your world is going to get a lot bigger than your phone screen. You'll learn to grow food instead of just photographing it. You'll experience what it means to create something with your own hands instead of just buying it. He paused, his expression softening slightly. And maybe, just maybe, you'll discover that your worth isn't measured by your father's bank account or your follower count, but by what you contribute to others. Ashley's eyes burned with angry tears as the reality of her situation sank in. 8 hours a day in a garden, with dirt and bugs and actual work? She glanced at her perfectly manicured nails, her designer outfit, her lifestyle that was about to come crashing down around her. This is so unfair, she whispered, but for the first time in her life, no one rushed to fix things for her. Life isn't fair, Miss Bennett, Judge Washington replied, gathering his papers. That's one of the first lessons you'll learn at River Heights. Court is adjourned. The bang of his gavel echoed through the courtroom like a final nail in the coffin of Ashley's privileged existence. As people began filing out, she caught sight of Mrs. Chen watching her with an unreadable expression. Tomorrow, she would step into a world she never knew existed. A world of early mornings, hard work, and lessons that no amount of money could buy. Little did Ashley know, this sentence wasn't just punishment. It was an opportunity for transformation. But first, she would have to get her hands dirty, in more ways than one. The sun hadn't even fully risen when Ashley's alarm blared at 7 a.m. She'd never seen this hour of the morning before, at least not from this end. Dragging herself out of bed, she stared helplessly at her closet full of designer clothes. What does one even wear to do gardening? She settled on the cheapest workout outfit she owned, which still cost more than most people's entire wardrobe. As her driver pulled up to River Heights Community Garden, she could already feel her perfectly styled hair frizzing in the morning humidity. You're late, Mrs. Chen said simply, not looking up from where she was already working in the soil. It's 8:15. Traffic was terrible, Ashley lied, clutching her premium coffee cup like a shield. And I had to get my morning coffee. Mrs. Chen finally looked up, her experienced eyes taking in Ashley's pristine outfit and impractical shoes. Put that coffee down and put these on, she said, holding out a pair of work gloves. We start with clearing the debris from your accident. The next hour was pure torture for Ashley. Every time she bent down to pick up another piece of broken garden bed, her back screamed in protest. Her perfectly manicured nails were getting dirty even through the gloves, and the morning sun was making her sweat in most un-influencer-like ways. This is literally abuse, she muttered, straightening up for the 100th time. I could pay someone to do this in like an hour. That's the problem, a young voice said behind her. Ashley turned to find a little girl, maybe 10 years old, holding a watering can almost as bait as she was. You think everything can be solved with money. Well, it usually can, Ashley snapped, then immediately felt stupid for arguing with a child. The girl, whose name was Lily, just shrugged. Money didn't help my mom when she got sick, but the vegetables we grow here did. The community helped us. That's worth more than money. Ashley opened her mouth to reply, then closed it again. For once in her life, she didn't have a quick comeback. The morning dragged on. Mrs. Chen showed no mercy, moving Ashley from task to task. Clean this, dig that, carry those heavy bags of soil. By lunchtime, Ashley was ready to call her father and beg him to buy the entire garden just to make this stop. But something strange happened during lunch break. As she sat alone with her expensive salad, she watched the regular garden volunteers sharing their homemade lunches, laughing and talking like one big family. A grandmother teaching her grandchildren about different plants. A group of teens working on what looked like a science project among the vegetable beds. Here, Lily appeared again, holding out half a sandwich. My mom made extra. Ashley stared at the simple offering. I have my own lunch. Yeah, but ours is better, Lily said with the confidence only a child could have. Mom says food tastes better when it's made with love. Almost against her will, Ashley found herself accepting the sandwich. It was just peanut butter and jelly, probably on bread that cost a tenth of what her organic kale salad did. But as she took a small bite, she had to admit, it did taste different. Better, somehow. The afternoon brought more challenges. Ashley's phone kept buzzing with notifications from her followers, wondering why she wasn't posting her usual content. Her arms ached from carrying tools, and her designer workout outfit was stained with dirt. Day 1 is done. Mrs. Chen announced at 4 p.m., "You did. Acceptable work. For a beginner." Ashley couldn't decide if she should be offended or proud that she'd managed to earn even that small praise. As she waited for her driver, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in her phone screen. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was a mess, and there was dirt on her face. But there was something else too. Something she hadn't seen in her own eyes for a long time. A tiny spark of something. Achievement. Reality. She quickly looked away, not ready to examine that feeling too closely. "See you tomorrow," Lily called out cheerfully. "Mom says you'll get used to the work. Your hands will get stronger." Ashley looked down at her soft, pampered hands, now slightly red despite the gloves. Get used to it? Never. She'd find a way out of this. She had to. But as her driver pulled away, she found herself wondering about Lily's mom, about the community that shared lunches and laughter, about the mysterious satisfaction of creating something with your own hands. Not that she'd ever admit it, but maybe, just maybe, there was something here money couldn't buy. 2 weeks into her community service, Ashley arrived at the garden earlier than usual. Her designer workout clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a t-shirt. It just made more sense for the work. She'd even started bringing her own water bottle instead of demanding her driver make coffee runs. She was arranging tools for the day's work when she heard crying coming from the garden's small office. Through the window, she saw a woman she recognized as Lily's mother, Mrs. Rodriguez, sitting with her head in her hands while Mrs. Chen patted her shoulder. "I don't know what to do anymore," Mrs. Rodriguez was saying, her voice carrying through the partially open window. "Tommy's diabetes needs strict control, but fresh vegetables are so expensive at the store." Without the garden's produce, she trailed off, wiping her eyes. Ashley froze. Tommy, that was Lily's little brother, the quiet kid who always sat drawing pictures while his mom worked in the garden. She'd seen him around, but never paid much attention. "The garden will recover," Mrs. Chen assured her. "But it will take time. The damaged beds were where we grew most of our tomatoes and leafy greens." "Time we don't have," Mrs. Rodriguez whispered. "I'm already working 2 jobs. The medical bills." Ashley felt something unfamiliar in her chest, a tight, uncomfortable feeling. She looked down at her hands, no longer perfectly manicured, but showing calluses from actual work. These past 2 weeks, she'd been so focused on her own discomfort that she hadn't really thought about why this garden mattered. Later that morning, she watched Tommy sitting on a garden bench, carefully checking his blood sugar. Lily sat next to him, trying to make him laugh by making funny faces. The tight feeling in Ashley's chest got worse. During lunch break, instead of eating, Ashley pulled out her phone, not to check her social media, but to do something she'd never done before: research. She read about diabetes, about nutrition, about the importance of fresh vegetables in managing the condition. With each article, the weight of what she destroyed became clearer. Her fingers hovered over her social media apps. She had millions of followers, brand deals, influence. She always used these things to show off her privileged life. But maybe. That evening, after everyone had left, Ashley stayed behind. Mrs. Chen found her sitting on the ground, surrounded by papers covered in notes and calculations. "I had no idea," Ashley said quietly, not looking up. "About Tommy. About any of it. When I crashed into the garden, I thought I was just breaking some plants. But I was breaking people's lives, wasn't I?" Mrs. Chen sat down beside her, ignoring the dirt that would stain her clothes. "Understanding that is the first step to fixing it." "I want to fix it," Ashley said, her voice stronger now. "Not with my father's money. Not by throwing cash at the problem and walking away. I want to really fix it." She held up her phone, showing Mrs. Chen the draft of a post she'd written. It wasn't her usual filtered, perfect content. Instead, it was raw and honest, explaining what she'd done, what she'd learned, and asking her followers to help support the garden's reconstruction. "I have all these followers," Ashley explained. "People who buy anything I tell them to buy, who go anywhere I tell them to go. What if I use that for something that actually matters?" Mrs. Chen studied the young woman before her, so different from the entitled girl who'd arrived 2 weeks ago. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the worst mistakes lead to the best changes." That night, Ashley hit post on something very different from her usual content. No filters, no perfect lighting, just her dirty hands holding a seedling, with a caption that began, 2 weeks ago, "I thought this community garden was nothing. Today, I learned it's everything to families like Tommy and Lily's." Her phone started buzzing immediately with notifications, but for the first time in her life, Ashley didn't care about the likes or comments. She was too busy planning tomorrow's post about diabetes awareness and community gardens, and wondering if any of her fashion brand contacts might be interested in sponsoring new garden beds. As she finally drifted off to sleep, she realized something. Her hands might be dirty, but her heart felt cleaner than it had in years. 3 months after her first day at River Heights Community Garden, Ashley stood among flourishing vegetable beds, her hands on her hips as she surveyed the morning's work. The garden had transformed, but not nearly as much as she had. "Miss Bennett," a familiar voice called out. Ashley turned to see Judge Washington walking through the garden's new entrance gate, accompanied by Mrs. Chen. She quickly wiped her hands on her work jeans, suddenly conscious of the dirt under her nails and her messy ponytail. "Your Honor," she said, then smiled. "Would you like a tour? The tomatoes are coming in beautifully, and wait until you see our new greenhouse." The judge raised an eyebrow at the word "our," but followed as Ashley enthusiastically led the way through the garden. She pointed out the new raised beds built with money from her viral fundraising campaign, the children's education area sponsored by a local business she'd contacted, and the expanded greenhouse funded by one of her former fashion partners. "And here," she said, stopping at a particularly lush vegetable plot, "this is Tommy's garden. We designed it specifically for growing vegetables that help manage diabetes. Now 5 other families with diabetic members have their own plots too." Little Tommy waved from where he was carefully watering his plants, his sister Lily beside him checking items off a planting schedule they'd created together. The judge watched as Ashley waved back, noticing how natural she seemed in this environment, so different from the angry young woman who'd stood in his courtroom. "Your community service hours are complete," he said finally. "You're free to return to your previous life." Ashley's face fell slightly. "Oh," she said, looking around at the garden. At Mrs. Chen, teaching a group of seniors about composting. At the mothers harvesting vegetables for their families. At the teenagers learning about science through growing their own food. Actually, Your Honor, I was hoping to stay on. As a volunteer, I mean. We're starting a new program next month, teaching social media marketing to the teenage gardeners so they can help spread awareness about food security and community gardens. The judge smiled. We? Yes, we, Mrs. Chen stepped in, putting a hand on Ashley's shoulder. Ashley has become an invaluable part of our community. Her social media expertise has helped us reach thousands of people, and her gardening skills. She paused, eyes twinkling. Well, those are improving. Ashley laughed, a real laugh, not the artificial one she'd once used for Instagram stories. I killed a lot of plants at first, she admitted. But Mrs. Chen says gardens are forgiving. They give you another chance to grow something beautiful. Just then, Ashley's phone buzzed. Instead of jumping to check it immediately like she once would have, she glanced at Mrs. Chen for permission before pulling it out. It's the organic market, she exclaimed. They've agreed to buy our excess produce at fair trade prices. This means we can start paying some of our regular volunteers, create jobs for the community. The judge watched as she excitedly discussed plans with Mrs. Chen, her eyes bright with purpose rather than privilege. On her phone screen, he caught a glimpse of her latest social media post. No filters, no pose photos, just genuine content about community, growth, and giving back. Her follower count had actually grown since she changed her content focus, but that clearly wasn't what mattered to her anymore. Miss Bennett, he said finally, what would you say was the most important lesson you learned here? Ashley looked around the thriving garden, at the community she'd become part of, then down at her dirty hands that had learned to create rather than just consume. I learned that real growth isn't about followers or fame, she said thoughtfully. It's about putting down roots in what matters. About nurturing others instead of just myself. She smiled. And sometimes, the best things in life can't be bought. They have to be grown. As if to emphasize her point, Lily ran up with a fresh tomato from their garden. First harvest of the season, she announced proudly. Want to share it? The judge watched as Ashley, who once wouldn't eat anything that wasn't served at a 5-star restaurant, happily split a homegrown tomato with a little girl from a family she would have previously ignored. The garden had grown more than vegetables. It had grown wisdom, compassion, and community. And Ashley Bennett, the girl who had crashed into the garden thinking only of herself, had blossomed into someone who thought first of others, proving that sometimes the most beautiful transformations start with getting your hands dirty.